Good morning, Matt Waldman. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, Happy Hanukkah, all those things to you, sir. It's the holiday season.
Right
Ho, ho,
back
ho.
at you.
And also, it's the fantasy season for the most part. Winding down, most everyone has played their championship games and got fucked or felt or something. An interesting week 17 spread across the course of many days. So it's like for some, it was a slow motion train wreck. For others, it was a deliciously extended dominance. However, I hope you were in the
Yeah,
latter group out there if you're
we
listening.
definitely hope. Yes.
I'm Bob Harris. He's Matt Waldman. This is Feel It or Fuck It. We're going to sit here and react to things and discuss them. It is not a deep dive into the analytics of the game. It is more our impressions because we're old people who have been watching football and playing fantasy for many thousand of years. And we're going to kind of rumble through some things. But first, we're going to talk about the rookie scouting portfolio. Where are we at? What's the process? Where are we at in the process?
Well, we're just, this is the full bore watching tape. We've been doing it all year, and we're going to continue to. The pre-draft, the pre-order process is underway. So if you would like to pre-order the RSP, you can do so at the full price of $21.95 at mountwaldman.com. I'm about halfway through the receivers that I'm going to watch this year, most likely. So, we're closing in on 100 players out of the 150 that I will watch, or at least the 150 that I will watch. So basically watching 2 or 3 players a day, usually about somewhere between probably 5 to 7 games each, doing that kind of work. And it's a good time, and we're in the 20th year. And I'm posting stuff on X right now to just kind of share some previous scouting reports if you want to take a look at some of those, ranging from people like A.J. Brown and Justin Jefferson and Lad McConkey, 3 players that people said, they're in horrible fits, and they turned out to be in pretty good fits, things like that. Or ranging from like Zach Wilson to Brock Purdy, and kind of giving people an idea of kind of the detail that you can get with these reports. And, that's just part of the package, really, because most of the work that people really value the most is the analysis that comes at the front of the chapter, in addition to the scouting reports about the positions. That'll be written up in March, after I do all the work, all the legwork that I'm doing right now between now and the end of February.
Not that you need a salesman. And I don't feel like I need to be a salesman. I often sound like one. And so instead of going into full length, I mean, as for me, as someone who is studying the NFL or watching closely and following the NFL, and I pay no attention to college. I don't care. It's not my job. NFL's my job. Fantasy football, my job. So I need to catch up quickly. Once we get into the portion of the season where I need to understand who these players are and have a better understanding of what they're capable of, especially once they land with their NFL teams. There is a post-draft RSP as well that adds to that. But I'll just say this: if you take anything away from me today, try this. Take one look. That's all it takes. You'll be hooked. I guarantee it.
I'd say, I would say that I'm known in this industry for making bold calls. I definitely make bold calls, and I miss on some, and I hit on others.
And people remembered your misses.
And people remember. I would say, but I would say this: if you're still bringing up Trey Sermon and Hakeem Butler, I would say that I'm doing pretty good.
Somebody brought up Trey Sermon in one of my live streams the other day.
Yeah,
he was met with some derision. There was a little fucking going on there.
Yeah, I'm sure. But that's the thing. Like, you're gonna make some bold calls on some players, and you miss, and sometimes you hit. But I'd say that my hits tend to have pretty good gravity, but you're gonna live with some of the misses too, with some of the bold calls that happen, because you have a different process, and sometimes that I would joke that the way that you become a subscriber, the first step to becoming a subscriber is to think that I'm a moron or an idiot about what it is that I look at. Like, oh, you rated Jared Goff ahead of Dak Prescott. Jared Goff is an absolute bust. You're an idiot. Okay, well, here we are today. And while both are good, I would say that maybe we need to be a little bit patient. Or Marcus Mariota, he's awesome. You're an idiot, And then we look back, 7 years later, and those types of things happen. So I would say you're going to get something that's different because it has a different process, but it's a process that's appreciated by, quarterback coaches to pros, to scouts, to NFL people. I had someone I'm going to share this. I'll sell myself on this one, and then we'll get the end of this. But I did have someone tell me, a beat reporter, say, he's friends with an owner, and I'll just say he's an AFC owner, and they said, they said I'm interested in watching some guys who are independent tape analysts. Instead of hitting up my scouts, I'm just curious about like this type of stuff. And who do you have to recommend? And one of the guys that he mentioned obviously was Dane Brugler, who does excellent work over at The Athletic and with the Beast draft guide that that covers what it covers. And Dane's excellent, And I would say Dane and my work, from what I'm told by Alex Brown over at Ole Miss, who's the head of recruiting there, that the two independent draft guides that are purchased the most by scouts and personnel people are ours. The RSP and the Beast. And so, most people would know of Dane, and it's obvious. Like, you go on Twitter, most people don't need to say, how do you spell Dane Brugler? But, the owner.
I think everyone knows how to spell Matt Waldman, too.
Well,
it's easy to spell.
It is easy to spell, but you know what I'm saying. And so, they would ask him, and he wrote the name down in the book, like, oh, okay, thank you. And then he had anybody else, and he mentioned me. And the guy closed the book, smiled, put the pen back in his pocket, and said, oh, no, I'm already well aware of him. Do you know him? Are you friends with him? So that's nice, and a reversal of things, because I'd say from the general public standpoint, I would say, Dane's book is the most popular. But from an insider standpoint, I would say that the fact that the guy had to, basically close the book, put it away, and said, no, I'm already well aware. So that's a good sign. So.
Well, it's nice to know I have something in common with an AFC owner. I hope it's not Ursay.
It's not. It's not. They are going to be they may be a playoff team. I'll put it that way.
All right, fair enough. All right, well, we'll get into it here. And by the way, there's still stuff ongoing for me at footballguys.com. And if you want to see like the misses, go check out my in and out column where I make fantastic, crazy picks every week, and miss about half of them. But that's not the point. It's sharing the process and what the thoughts are behind the process. Whether you agree with anything we say here, people, is not the point. It's if you take away, even if you 100% disagree with our takes or our outcomes or the places we reach with this, the process of how we go through may well like further define your like disagreement. Oh yeah, that's exactly why I disagree.
Right.
As we go through our process. So that's kind of the point of all this. So we'll start here, Matt. Sophomore slumps, are they real? Feel it or fuck it?
They are real, but I think we have to be careful about how we define what a sophomore slump actually is with the player, because more often than not, it has to do with the slump of the team and not just the player. So I think that's something that we have to be careful with, but oftentimes signs of sophomore slumps can be players who start off strong or they have strong moments, and then they're going to be relied on more, and they think that they've made it in the NFL in their rookie year, and they start letting off the pedal in terms of like the amount of work they need to do, and they're not working hard at it. I would say a good example of that player probably was Ryan Matthews over at with the San Diego Chargers back in the day. Unbelievably talented back, who when Norv Turner was going to give him the entire offense, I can tell you this later on, and he had he salvaged his career, but he could have been a superstar, I think. But he didn't dedicate himself to his craft in the off season in year two, and it became it was kind of a difficult thing, and he was kind of an up and down player because of the fact that he just kind of thought he already had it made, and a lot of players go through that. So Matthews was a great talent, and he ended up having a decent career. But you see players like that who are not even as talented as Matthews, who go, I made it to the NFL, and that was the goal, not to thrive in it, just to make it.
Yeah, I think there's something to that. Also, I think there's something to the fact that slumps can come any damn time, right? Like, and a lot of times, not as much due to the player as due to the circumstances surrounding the player. So I'm reluctant. Like, there clearly are players who slump in their second year.
Yeah.
Also players who slump in their third years. Also players who slump throughout various points in their career. CJ Stroud, however, is in his second year after an offensive rookie of the year campaign. This year has been a struggle. Offensive line issues, attrition at wide receiver, an evaporating running game as the season wore on. But also, Stroud didn't look as good. Like, the accuracy was in question at times. Was this a sophomore slump, or were some of those other factors bigger deals?
I think those factors are bigger deals. You know, looking at his game, especially around midseason as things were falling apart, you could see that this offensive line, especially its guards, couldn't handle certain types of twists in games, and then there were issues with cross blitzes that they couldn't handle on a repeat basis, and it just seemed like they were quite vulnerable to pressure. And CJ Stroud was never going to be mistaken for Jaden Daniels as a guy in and out of the pocket. And I know that people looked at the Georgia game and said, oh, there's a running element to that. And I'm like, nah, he's not even Patrick Mahomes, you know, and that running element, you know, as he's a guy that's more like Matt Ryan, like early career Matt Ryan at best. And I think that was a little bit overstated with him. But when you lose your receivers and you're playing with backups off and on, and one of those guys that you lost, not only was it Nico Collins that you lost, not only was it Tank Dell who was in and out of the lineup, and Stephon Diggs, that was your starting three. They got the most reps probably with him this summer. You also lost your super reserve Noah Brown, who you had a fantastic connection with year one. So if you really look at this, there were four receivers. The four best receivers heading into the year were gone, basically off, gone for periods of time. And when you're getting constant pressure, it wears you down. You look at the difference between, say, the next guy we're going to talk about, probably, on this list, Caleb Williams, and you can see the difference from the beginning of the year to the end of the year, where we're gonna try and shore up the amount of pressure that comes his way, so that at least he's not worn out by the third quarter. That makes a difference. Kirk Cousins pressured a lot. By the end of the games, he's throwing interceptions. A lot of that has to do with just the natural part of what pressure does to you, no matter how experienced you are. Very rarely are you going to overcome that if it's constant. So I would say with CJ Stroud, I would cut him a little slack from what I've seen. He still made some quick-witted, I would say quick plays, quick reactions to things that were well thought out. I just think that he lost a lot of that infrastructure, and we tend to underrate the value of that infrastructure when it comes to how good a quarterback plays or how bad a quarterback plays.
Fuck it. All true. But it's a sophomore slump, and here's what's going to happen. What fantasy managers who aren't paying attention to us or who aren't digging deeper are going to look at is he finished quarterback 17, or at least that's where he sits as we speak right now. And they are going to remember spending a top 10 quarterback anyway, quarterback 6, 7 going in drafts, and they're going to avoid him. And the rest of us out there are going to get great value on CJ Stroud well into the double-digit rounds next year, and probably get a rebound player for all the reasons Matt just outlined. So, fuck yeah, it was a sophomore slump, and everyone out there should believe that so I can get a cheap component next year. That's what it's all about. You mentioned Caleb Williams. So, I think there's a perception out there. I would say, quarterback 13, maybe that's not a great perception if we're talking CJ Stroud was quarterback 17. But anyway, you get 3,393 yards passing, 61.9% completion rate, 19 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, 67 sacks. Caleb Williams have a bad year? Feel it or fuck it.
Oh, fuck that. But I would say most people are going to feel that.
Right.
because they're going to look at the sacks. They're going to look at that and say, well, he took a lot of sacks. But if depending on how that's charted, which is always the biggest issue, because how people manage charting is all over the place.
Right. It's subjective.
It's very subjective, and at the same time, too, it's not usually well defined across all the parties who are doing the charting. As someone who managed these groups and managed best practices for how people charted, not in football, but in another industry, I can tell you that most people don't even have a clue about a process of how to do this. They throw a lot of money at it, by meaning they get enough bodies that they can pay and someone to manage it. And the person who's managing it has never really looked at statistical processes for how that they can reduce variation or anything like that to apply to a situation like this. And so as a result, you get this shit all over the place. But when you look at Caleb Williams, let's look at it this way. For me, at least, my expectation was this. Caleb Williams was the most equipped to go to a shitty team and survive. Okay? And that was, to me, the line for success. It wasn't whether he was going to be great. What happened is that he had, 3 strong-looking receivers, and they added DeAndre Swift. And again, football people who overemphasize skill players and underemphasize the offensive line were like, he's going to be great. He's going to be great right away. And they're not thinking, did they really fix this offensive line? Turns out they didn't. And turns out that the scheme was pretty rough too. So when you look at all the things that he had to go through in terms of not having an offensive coordinator who could coordinate all the drops with what they should be for the play, where he kind of had to wing it sometimes with his footwork, to where they're dropping back 3, 5, 7 step, really more like 5 and 7 steps on a lot of plays, where the offensive line can't support that. They play DJ Moore out of position. He played flanker his entire career. Now you're going to put him at split end, when Rome Odunze should probably be the natural split end for that. Keenan Allen's dropping balls left and right. And then you consider the fact that by the third quarter, Williams is getting the shit kicked out of him. He's gonna respond to pressure that way. It took just some tweaks to those things. Tweaks, not even being able to spend a whole off season to revamp it. Tweaks from a kid from Tucker, Georgia, Thomas Brown, and by from week 11 on, he's been QB6 until that Seattle game. QB6,
QB9 overall.
QB9 still,
right?
Yeah,
19 points, 18 points a game. That was the shift, right? That's where you could see that the damage that had been done by the play calling. And I know Courtney Cronin from ESPN was reporting when Brown first took over. Some of the personal relationship between those two was also a factor. That having Brown in his ear, as he was heading up the line, in the huddle, telling him he was Superman, I believe was one quote, and to, go out and do his thing. And, just some of those kind of messages that he was getting were helpful. Also was helpful that he, the ball started getting out of his hand more quickly. Gee, I wonder why.
Yeah.
Maybe because coaching, right? Maybe
and maybe
doing some things different.
So when you combine doing things differently with a coach who says, I know you're capable,
right,
as opposed to a coach who's putting obstacles in front of you in every turn and probably isn't saying anything, or and I doubt he's doing the Robert Flores routine of you suck to
Brian
Flores. He's got to earn his first name again after the shit that he pulled with that quarterback. But it's I look at it this way: the best thing that maybe Malik Neighbors is at, and we're going to talk about him later, I'm sure, is names. He's underrated at names. I mean, before he even got signed by the facility, I think, signed to his contract, he's already calling him Janiel Dones. To me,
I love it.
I mean, as Matt Harmon said, he's playing 3D chess, but he's doing it in multiple ways. So I'm barring one from the neighbors. Right. I bet he does too. But or Cam Ward, or any of those guys. But yeah, I would probably So yeah, I'm calling him Robert Flores until he's earned the name Brian.
All right,
back.
well, you want to take a second to put your track shoes on here before you run this victory lap, or you just want to run it? Lad McConkey, was he a fluke? Feel it or fuck it?
Yeah, fuck that. He wasn't a fluke. And the things that people should remember is this: when you're and this was just stated in the article back in June, is that you have Greg Roman's offense led by slot receivers. Michael Crabtree was a good example of that. You had him with a quarterback who was probably, I would say Lamar Jackson's still a better quarterback than Josh Herbert, or than Justin Herbert. But I would also say that the Ravens were very cautious about how they used Lamar and had to learn that Lamar was better than they thought he was, even as a passer. So they kind of gave him kid gloves in that offense. They weren't doing that with veteran Justin Herbert. So when you look at all that and you see that Herbert's saying basically in May, the kid makes adjustments to coverage with a rapport we're gaining. It feels like I'm working with like a 3 or 5 year veteran. And when you watch the games, that's exactly what was going on. Is he's devastating in the end zone for a little guy. He wins a lot of routes uncovering end zone or getting into tight windows and winning the ball. And then you can see he also can win some outside. He's not, he's more Cooper Kupp-esque in that regard than he is like Brian Thomas on the outside. But he's certainly a guy that's not a fluke. And I think that this is far from his best season for his career.
I want to say, as soon as he matures into a grown adult, he's going to be a devastating weapon in this game. Also, I don't know how Josh Herbert got thrown into the Daniel Jones, Robert Flores mood. He's done nothing to you, Matt Waldman.
He hasn't. He's been very good. That was just a mistake on my end. That was just a mistake.
But I'm just being a dick
But that's okay, because Lad McConkey's going to dress up as like a little baby. He's going to dress like Shirley Temple for you. And after he has like another, he's going to have like a 1,500-yard season one day.
I'm already sold. He doesn't have to do that, but I hope he does, and I hope it's on one of my teams. Although I believe he'll be slightly more expensive than what suits my tastes next year.
Can you sing "Good Shit Lollipop"?
I can't sing that. I know all the words. So you mentioned Brian Thomas Jr. Was he a surprise?
I think he was a bit, not totally, but yes. Like to me, I described him as AJ Green light. And I thought that, and I had a grade for him as an instant starter and anchor of a team, which is a pretty fucking high grade. When you're getting a grade in the high 80s, low 90s on the RSP for your receiving, as a top 5 player in this class, that tells you how strong this class really was. Good route runner. I think what he showed is that he was able to pick up the system that the Jaguars put in front of him pretty quickly and play at a level where the route running nuances were completely there, and that he was being able to, read the coverage as well and be on the same page with his quarterback at an early level. At this early part of his career. I thought he would be flirting with 1,000 yards but I thought he was more, I would say the baseline for me was more probably somewhere between 700 to 900 yards that I thought was realistic. So the fact that I think he slightly exceeded expectations for me, but I think still, with this team, it was still a surprise, especially when they lost Trevor Lawrence and he's still doing it with Mac Jones.
I would say over the last month or so, he's become the poster man for my great theory, which we will discuss at length here momentarily. Cleveland. Getting rid of Baker Mayfield was a mistake. Why am I setting up for you for this slam dunk? I feel like go.
I'm saying fuck that.
I don't
think it was a mistake. I think it's fuck that revisionist history. Baker Mayfield has played great the past couple years relative to the way he played in Cleveland. And he definitely deserves a hearty congratulations for that and praise for the way that he's played. But Baker Mayfield in the pocket is right now, the way he's playing in Tampa the past 2 years, especially this year, is much different than the Baker Mayfield I saw in Cleveland, who could not manage a pocket. And that's a big difference when you can create second chance opportunities without having to break a pocket and invite pressure. And in Cleveland, that happened way too much. And he had years to get better at that, and he didn't. And it took him being a journeyman to 3 teams, basically. He was on 3 teams in 2 years for him to figure that out. His wife even stated that he basically had a come to Jesus moment during this period that figured out there's some things I have to own and I have to get better at.
Is this not an argument, though, for teams to be more patient with first-round talent and put a little more effort into it? I mean,
I would. That's a great point, and I would argue, yes, you're right about that, but also, how many years was Baker Mayfield?
But look where Cleveland's at now, and I'm just wondering if a little more effort and a little more patience might not have put them in a better place.
But compared to other teams, how many?
Fuck yeah, it was a mistake.
But how many years was he a starter in Cleveland? How many years? I think it's more than that. If you count his rookie year, I think it was 4.
I guess you count his rookie year, yes.
So I think, when you have 3.5 to 4 years as a starter, and you haven't figured out the things that you need to get better
at.
Odell
Beckham's dad. I mean, there was
at the end of the year, yes, it was. And I would say, if we're going to raise the bar and say all teams need to be more patient, yes. But relative to other teams in the league, yes. Cleveland was the only team that was more patient with a shitty playing quarterback, and I wouldn't say shitty playing, but not as good as he should be. We're the New York Giants with Daniel Jones.
I'm going to take my win and we'll move on. Yeah, more patience.
I agree.
Xavier Worthy. Well, go ahead, finish up.
No, I agree with you that there should be better development.
Right.
The bigger picture, there should be better development. Right. But if we're going to look at the way things have been, Cleveland was more patient, and there's some Baker had to own it, and he did own it, and good for him, But I wouldn't look at this and pile on Cleveland for that. There's enough to pile on just with the quarterbacks they've had this year.
And for those of you out there who don't actually know me preaching patience, a little bit of a reach there. Xavier Worthy, more Mecole Hardman or Tyreek Hill?
Yeah, I think he's more Tyreek,
I do too.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing
it.
Yeah, it's starting to happen. I think they wanted to. It was easy to use him as a Mecole type of gadget player early on, but I think they were always trying to give him more and more each week, and sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't, and he was up and down. But I think we're going to see, I would say, if Deshaun Jackson is like a tier down from Tyreek Hill, then that's where he is. But that's still like probably a good 3 to 4 tiers higher than Mecole Hardman.
I think again, last month of the season, we've seen a progression that suggests bigger and better things are ahead. To me, for Xavier Worthy, I don't know if that's the case for me with George Pickens. Is he a future elite wide receiver? Feel it or fuck it, Matt Waldman.
Fuck it, I don't think so. And maybe that's my Steelers bias, my anti-Steelers bias. But I think a lot of it is he's a great jump ball boundary winner. He's kind of like he's a freakier version of T. Higgins at best. But I would say I wouldn't even say that. He's a freakier T. Higgins extra light version, like a diluted T. Higgins version, because he's not the route runner he needs to be. He's kind of used a little bit too much in a smaller dimensional package of things that they ask him to do, and he's inconsistent. Is he capable of becoming like an AJ Green like talent? Physically, absolutely. But if it ain't here by now, I'm a little worried that this is going to follow kind of the Deontay Johnson trajectory with him.
Or Antonio Brown.
Yeah.
So this is like, and I've talked to a number of people media who are closely, including like Antonio Brown's radio show co-host and many others who the Steelers do a great job of keeping things in-house. And it's not until after the fact that we find out how off the rails things get with some of these guys. But their post-Steeler careers suggest, or actually don't suggest, actually highlight all the issues the Steelers tend to deal with and keep in the house. So and maybe I'm reading too much into George Pickens' behavior during games, or maybe not.
So basically, they put Deontay Johnson in a bag, lit a match, and put it outside Carolina's door so that it lit it on fire.
And then Carolina did the same to Baltimore.
Okay.
So that's this team. So look, I think if anyone can get people on track, it seems like Mike Tomlin, right? But also Mike Tomlin is a man who wants volunteers and not hostages. And if at some point you're acting like you're in a bad situation when he feels like he's putting you in a good situation, you're probably not going to be there for long. So we'll see with George Pickens. I hope he comes around. I think he's a talented player. All the things you said are true. He does need to work on some things. I don't know that he seems to me, but I'm not there every day. I don't know the guy, but just the narrow band and the comments that he makes when he doesn't, like when he quits on a play, or
Nick Chubb plays well in the snow, and he's from Chubbtown, Georgia. So I don't know what the deal was with the whole snow game thing that he made out to be. Maybe that was something he needs to back away from. But then
should pick less fights during games. Javon Baker, liftoff coming in year 2.
I think it's possible. But it's kind of in the same range as I can't remember his name. I'm sorry. I'm thinking of new receivers, but the Bengals receiver, who's the rookie from Alabama. Burton. Yes, thank you. I was going to say Barnett, and I knew that was wrong. I'm on this track right now where I'm going to be dissing.
The young man
he's going to have to earn his name
show
too.
All the practices, show up for every practice.
Maybe we should. He's the one we should have misnamed. Maybe we should call him Jermaine Barnett. Jermaine Jernigan until he starts practicing better. But I think Baker. The big thing about him off the field was that his dad apparently was kind of the guy that they were worried was going to be one of those bad NFL dads who might be a little too involved in stuff and a distraction to what's going on. But Baker's played well in practice. He started to get more reps, but they didn't really give him a ton in terms of opportunities this year. Now, at the same time, Kayshon Boutte was kind of in a similar situation last year. And then this year, you could see he took another step forward. So Baker could very well be that guy for year 2. And, with Drake May playing pretty well as a rookie thus far, that could be a nice thing. And especially when you look at this receiver class, I'm not unbelievably enthused about this receiver class. So I think a guy like Javon Baker could very well hold his own in camp next year and develop from there.
Yeah, he and Jalen Polk are in ideal situations. You have what looks like a really good young quarterback in Drake May. There's a reason probably he was picked 3rd overall, whatever you think, of that, that draft order or whatever. But clearly one of the best quarterbacks in last year's draft, and he's thrust into a starting role on a team that doesn't have an offensive line, doesn't have a high-end receiving core. Those guys, if they mature into that, can grow along with him. Which I think is ideal for those dynasty investors looking for cheap assets that might turn into a thing at some point. And Lord knows, I have many dynasty rosters littered with guys who failed in that regard, hoping to get some winners here. Marvin Mims Jr. looks like he might be a winner at some point. Is he Sean Payton's next Lance Moore?
I think he is. I think that he's one of those guys that he reminded me of Derek Mason coming out, and. Derek Mason was kind of a do-it-all guy who, if you really needed him to play split end, he had enough speed to do so as a good route runner, but he was more of a flanker slot type of option. And I think that when you look at Mims, you can put him in different positions on the field and get a lot out of him because he can win deep. He wins after the catch. He's a good ball winner. They just couldn't find really a way to maximize his skills. And I think that this year they've kind of it's worked out, and Peyton's excited about him, and you can see that he's stringing team games together where he's making plays, and I think he's quickly becoming a Bo Nix favorite. I'm enthused about him. I think that this is someone that's kind of probably a little under the radar that I'm sure a lot of fantasy analysts will probably be pumping up as a value, and he might get a little bit overdrafted, but we'll see.
Yeah, part of this is the Bo Nix discussion. That guy turned out to be okay too. right? And maybe a Sean Payton discussion as well. Tre McBride. Oh, he would be the best fantasy tight end in football with a good NFL quarterback. Wait a minute. Stop. Stop right there. I see what you're doing here. For the people out there who don't know, during the season, Matt makes the questions. In the offseason, I make the questions. So our workloads and the times worked out. I smell a Murray hater in this here. Let's just throw it out. McBride just hit 1,000 yards, making one of 2 tight ends this season, along with Brock Bowers. We'll talk about him to hit that 1,000-yard mark. He ranked top 3 in catches, number 1 at 104. Targets, receiving yards per game, yards per route, targets per route run, team target share, yards after catch, receiving first downs. He doesn't score a lot of touchdowns. So
How many touchdowns did he have until yesterday? How many did he have until yesterday?
He had 0 of those.
Just imagine if he just had 5. He'd be the best touchdown. He'd be the best.
They threw 4 to him in the end zone like 3 weeks ago, and he missed them all.
Yeah. Did he miss them all? Did he miss them all?
Well, maybe.
Okay. All right. I just
Go ahead.
I just want to know. I just think that it's low-hanging fruit that you got a player this good, and he's not scoring any touchdowns. And you have a quarterback who tends to make mistakes that you're just like, okay, he gets yardage, but is he really a touchdown maker on the level as a thrower? Or is he I'm going to raise my hand up and tell everybody I scored from 50 yards away, but we're still going to lose the fucking games. I just look at it as that, Kyler Murray's a skilled quarterback. I don't think he's a very good quarterback. And I think there's a little bit of a difference there. But
let's get into the argument then. That like you can be a good player, a good receiver without having a great quarterback. Brock Bowers.
Yeah.
Brock Bowers played with a series of pretty nondescript quarterbacks. I don't know. Arguably, Kyler Murray might be better than all of them. Maybe not. Maybe you see it differently. But just let's see. 63 years after Mike Ditka set his NFL record for receiving yards by rookie tight end.
Finally.
63 years. I'm not even. Well, I am 63. Oh, fuck. I lose track. It's been a long time. 1,076 yards. He now has 1,144 yards and counting for rookie tight ends. Also, not just Dick's records, Puka Nakua's record for most catches by a rookie at any position. 105 was in 2023 last year, obviously. He also has the Raiders' single season reception records set by Darren Waller in 2007, now with 107. He plays with lousy quarterbacks. We talked about Brian Thomas Jr., who emerged over the final month of the season to become a superstar, in my estimation, sir, with one Mac Jones. Nobody is going to claim Mac Jones is a great quarterback. Let's go ahead. So this has been my argument all year. I think Matt Waldman's setting me up for this for multiple years, right? We can go back to, I'll go to last year, Adam Thielen with Bryce Young, who arguably had the worst season of a rookie. Well, certainly a number 1 pick overall who started every game. It was like and Adam Thielen still had a wide receiver 17 season. He was wide receiver 12 through the first 12 games. We can go back the year before. Or Baker Mayfield. Everyone was out on Mike Evans because Baker Mayfield was there. Turns out Baker Mayfield played better. The year before, it was DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, who both finished inside the top 15 as wide receivers, playing with one Geno Smith, who was comeback player of the year. So different things can happen. And let's go with Malik Neighbors, who you mentioned earlier. It was a pretty damn good year, and he played with 4 different quarterbacks. One of them, Daniel Jones, who was subsequently released because he was so bad.
Yeah. No, I think it's a great argument, and I totally agree with you, and it's one that I've always ignored the people who say don't take a guy who doesn't have great quarterback play, especially rookies. I'm not worried about that at all. To me, the whole McBride thing, I'll just get back to that real quick and then go back to it, is that there's a difference. There is a ceiling. There's a difference between because imagine if Malik Neighbors and Brock Bowers and Tre McBride all had quarterbacks who were like high quality guys who could feed them who could feed them a little bit more effectively. And I would argue that these guys would be closer to career years than what they had.
Well, and we'll bring Marvin Harrison Jr. into this conversation as well. And I mean, you have different reasons for thinking his shortcomings this year were more about expectations than maybe about the quarterback, but probably include the quarterback there as well. I'll say this on that whole theory, though. There comes a point where, week to week, in season, you're probably going to take the quarterback more into account if you're making tough decisions. But when you're drafting, when you're looking for values in the draft, this is a key way to gain value, is to look at players who are being devalued. But last year we were drafting Marvin Harrison at the first portion of round 2, Malik Neighbors in round 4. The only reason for that was our perception of the quarterback situations. There's no other explaining it. And so there we have it. I mean, so I think it's more of a draft thing for fantasy managers. Then when you get into the season, you can kind of gauge it game by game and week by week. But I would say there's ample evidence that even in season, you shouldn't be dismissive. Said Brian Thomas, said last year's Adam Thielen, said this year's Brian Thomas Jr., it goes on and on. So just be mindful of it. We tend to inflate things in our mind, our fears, uncertainties, into much bigger things than they actually turn out to be. So just remember that when you're drafting next year and there's some receiver on a team and you perceive the quarterback situation to be less than ideal.
A.J. Brown, Justin Jefferson. Yeah,
correct.
Same, more of that.
Similar circumstances. All right, I'll get off my soapbox. Thank you for putting it out there for me, Matt Waldman. Amir Abdullah is an example of players getting inaccurate labels. Feel it or fuck it.
I'm kind of feeling that. I've always liked Ameer Abdullah. And, he was a starter for the Lions back in the day, a second-round pick. I believe he was a second-round pick. Maybe he was a fourth-round pick. But he was used as their starter. He fumbled that opportunity away. And then he's become a journeyman pretty much ever since. Vikings, the Panthers, now he's with the Raiders. But you see the end of the season, and it is the end of the season. Maybe he's more fresh legs, and some of these guys are tired, and maybe that's a little bit of with Sincere McCormick as well. But Abdullah's always been a versatile guy, good speed, someone with excellent contact balance for his size. And I think what happens is once you become a journeyman in the NFL, coaches and scouts kind of label players based on what they last did. And that label sometimes, if it's a quarterback, it's a different story because they can't figure out what to do with quarterbacks because of Bob's point about development. So they tend to go, oh, well, he was a first-round pick. Let's give him another opportunity to see what we have here. With Abdullah, you got a little bit of that, but more to the point of he can be good on special teams. He can be a good third down option. Does this mean that the 31-year-old, I think he's 30 or 31, I don't think Abdullah is going to become a starter that we need to pay attention to, but I think that sometimes you have to look at players and realize that when people say we know who he is, maybe that's not true. Maybe teams think they know who he is, and the best example I can give is a related player I like Abdullah, who I like to talk about at least once a year, is Cedric Pierman. Cedric Pierman came out of Virginia, played at the Senior Bowl. He had 4.3 speed. He could break tackles. Probably one of the better stiff arms I've seen of a player. Great special teams player. Wound up in Baltimore the year that Ray Rice exploded, and they had Willis McGahee. So they cut his ass, and he bounced from Detroit to Cleveland to Cincinnati, where he wound up basically within the span of the summer. He wound up special teams fodder on Cincinnati and became a special teams captain and an ace. And then years later, Jay Gruden ends up having to put him in a game because Kenny Irons and whoever else they mentioned, you can mention it running back before, Rudy Johnson kept getting hurt. And I think even Rudy Johnson got hurt, and they put Pierman in the game, and Pierman had a couple of really big games, and they were like, we didn't really know what we had in him. But he was on the roster for 6-7 years. And that's because teams label guys. And I think that this is important for the end of the season, that when you look at players, sometimes it's valuable to look back at what they did well. And if they were former starters, had opportunities to start, maybe you should take them a little more seriously. I know I should have, as someone who lost his semifinal game with a loaded Derrick Henry team and chose him over Etienne, but I had this nagging feeling pretty much all week I need to pick Abdullah, but I didn't do it.
This label is why I got talked out of out of Abdullah this past week and into Madison, who's viewed as more of the runner, right? And you think the game script's going to work in favor of the runner. And I went into the week convinced it was going to be Abdullah after 2 strong games, granted with touchdowns in each of them, put him up at like 19 fantasy points in each of those 2 games. But we listen to the voices that were telling us, he's a pass catcher, he's a receiving back, he's a third down player. Well,
paint by the numbers.
Also, he's a running back.
Yeah.
Right. And he made it to the NFL somehow as a running back. Probably assume he can actually serve
and
as a
still
running
has
back
more burst than Alexander
Right.
Madison. So.
All right. I think we've Amir Abdullah ourselves into contrition here. We're sorry, Amir Abdullah.
Yeah,
I should have
right.
respected you more, sir.
Yeah.
Parker Washington. I have no respect for you, sir. No, I do. Will he be a second year? Will he be a second contract starter?
I think he very well could be, because he makes a lot of eye-popping plays, and it's kind of like, to me, he's a potentially better version of Jawan Jennings, in the sense that I think he's has a chance to be a better route runner. I think he's as good or better as a contested catch player, and I know that he's as good as a player after the catch. And I could see him on this team where he gets labeled as kind of like the third or fourth guy or fifth guy on their depth chart. And then when the contract's over, there's going to be a team that looks at him and says, hey, you know what? We really need a slot guy who can serve as a flanker and
Christian
win
Kirk.
big, Yeah. And be like something more than what I see more in this guy than what other people see. And I think that's kind of where Parker Washington's career could go, is that he ends up being a low-end starter for some team in his second contract.
Kenny Pickett took a massive hit, according to all reporting, in yesterday's game that knocked him out of the game. Was it indeed a massive hit, or did the painkillers just wear off?
Maybe it's, again, because we're old, and maybe it's because I grew up on NFL's greatest hits, which I think now is equated to bullfighting and murder and, and all sorts of things. But I watched that, and was it a tough hit?
It was a hit. It wasn't even a tough hit.
It wasn't.
Come on, man. It was a shoulder to the shoulder.
And
it was perfectly reasonable. Pickett had a broken rib going into the game.
Yeah.
He had a pain-killing injection before the game. He had one at halftime. And at some point, probably just got worn down.
I took hits like this playing football without pads. I don't but
I felt like the hit that Jaden Daniels took near the goal line towards the end of last night's game. That was a massive hit. And I said, Jade, don't do that. Yeah. Don't put yourself in that spot.
But that's and all of them were normal hits from from the 1990s to early 2000s. I mean, and before. So I don't know. I just laughed that it said massive hit. I think that's a generational difference.
Yes, I think it is. I mentioned I'm 63. I remember Dick Butkus.
Yeah, exactly.
How did we get ready for high school games back in the 70s? We watched films of Dick Butkus trying to behead people. It was amazing. Right. Saquon Barkley, does he finish the Vengeance Tour in storybook fashion by setting the rushing record against his former team?
I'm all in now. Yeah, after that Steelers game, I'm all in, and I can't wait for it. And I think it's fantastic, and I think he should possibly wear a jersey that says Janiel Dones on it on the back.
I talked about this last week. Something Steve Smith said last weekend on the NFL Network postgame show, where this is as much about the offensive lineman as about Saquon Barkley. As I watched the game yesterday and saw him hit the 2,000-yard mark, and who was celebrating the most? The offensive lineman, man. They take a lot of pride in this. This is going to be a bone for those dogs. And I think they will try and set it. We'll see what the situation is. I mean, honestly, Nick Sirianni's going to have some probably sleepless nights over this, right? Because, you're going into the playoffs.
This fucks up. If this goes south, people are going to go lose their minds.
I'm guessing this goes to ownership level, and there will be discussions, and the discussions will be, let's do it. But maybe that's just me doing a little wish casting.
I think there's too much from a morale standpoint, for them not to do it. So I'm totally with you on that. Now, here's a quick question for you: feel it or fuck it. Saquon Barkley deserves an asterisk next to his name if he breaks the record. Okay.
Fuck it. That's look. Did Eric Dickerson deserve an asterisk by his?
That's the good question, because there's the Cleveland Browns fans will say yes.
O.J. Simpson did it in fewer seasons, right?
Yep.
He set the or fewer games. So no, it's just like that's
just the way it is.
It's the way it is. People deal with it and get over it. And I know if you want to put an asterisk on it, you're more than welcome to. I don't see your asterisk.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing to say is that they're all great backs.
Right.
And if you're going to argue one's better than the other, by all means, you're going to have a good argument. You don't need to. You don't have to worry about the asterisk.
You could say the challenge now is greater with the speed and athleticism of the competition you're playing against over a more extended period of time. Adds a layer of difficulty. Like if we were diving, to throw out the low, throw out the high, factor in the level of difficulty. I think the asterisk goes away.
And at the end of the day, I mean, listen, Bob. I mean, I think anybody with some sense would agree with this. Is that we all know that the greatest running back to ever play football was Bo Jackson, and he didn't play for very long.
That was Marcel Reese. What are we talking about here?
Oh,
all right.
Okay.
Moving right along. Didn't want to stir up any controversy there, kids. I was just joking. I just like Marcel Reese. I like Malik Neighbors too. Is the Frankenstein football baby of Odell Beckham and Jarvis Landry.
Absolutely. I was having this conversation with my buddy Alex yesterday, and he loved the comparison because I was talking about how he reminded me a lot of Odell, and he goes, yeah, but he's not as I think he's a little more physically resilient than what Odell Beckham has turned out to be, even though it's still early and we don't know. But the way that he plays is a little bit more economical. Way Neighbors plays, he's still capable of really dynamic work, but he's a little more economical as a mover. And then I thought, well, if he's that kind of resilient, tough, over the middle type of player who also can win the ball and play multiple positions, he is kind of a cross between Beckham and Landry. It's kind of like they had a love child, and his name is Malik Neighbors.
Yeah, just the touchdown catch and run yesterday is a reminder that that yes, also he can score touchdowns, but man, he has everything. He is the real deal for me. And I can remember I was having the discussions about the top three, and man, I think he's made a pretty good argument.
It wasn't close. It wasn't close. That's what my whole point was since last November. It wasn't close.
Correct. All right. Yeah. We'll close this out with another Matt Waldman favorite. Michael Penix Jr. Is the Atlanta offense passing attack going to be an underrated asset next year in our drafts?
Yeah, because people are still going to be split on Kyle Pitts. There's going to be worries about injury. There's going to be worries that he's just not that good, and people have already written him off. After what he didn't do with Kirk Cousins, Penix is going to seem unproven, even though there were some nice high moments in this game for him towards the end. But I think his ability to hang in the pocket, make some beautiful throws, and then what you've got with London and a full off season with London, hopefully Mooney and Pitts, I think this team has a chance to be a value for sure. I think you could see possibly two out of the three guys in this mix be top 20 fantasy values next year.
Yesterday it was everyone gets their touchdown day, even Kyle Pitts and Tre McBride. It was fantastic. I loved it. I felt every second of it. And you will feel more of us, or you can say fuck it and not, but we'll be here next week as we roll into the playoffs and into the offseason. So appreciate your time.
Yeah, and they got to come back. They got to be angry about something. Or just enjoy
I think they're angry about me backing off my strong Marcel Reese take.
Listen, you didn't back off the Jaden Daniels take, and I will say, that was an excellent take. He's definitely had an excellent season, and kudos to him, and hopefully he can continue that moving forward, and that the command that he's more than the Commanders' offense. I think there's a good chance that he is.
He needs to be a little more careful. Next year, we've got to fix Anthony Richardson. Who's going to do that?
Yeah, that's true. And I think I think maybe he needed to put on a Joe Flacco jersey and have Flacco on the back of his name, so
Maybe
his receivers will actually catch the football.
Maybe that'll help.
Yeah, that might help.
All right, that's it for us today. Thank you, Matt Waldman. Love you. Goodbye.
Thank you, Bob. Love you. Bye.